Notice. That's it. A little bit more.
This is Audible.
Hello, I'm Dr. Stephen Farmer, and welcome to Messages from Your Animal Spirit Guides. In this first section, I'll explain a few things about animal spirit guides, define some terms, and tell you how you can discover and interpret messages from them. On track 2, you'll find a user-friendly guided meditation journey, one that was described in my book, Animal Spirit Guides. In this guided meditation journey, you'll meet an animal spirit guide, ask them a question about any of your concerns, and receive guidance from them to help you resolve those concerns. Track 3 is a 15-minute drumming track with no voiceover. Once you've done the guided meditation journey on track 2 a couple of times, you may want to try doing your own meditation journey with this track. One of the great advantages of working with animal spirit guides is that animals are so abundantly present in the material world, whether in the flesh or as symbols. One way a spirit animal communicates is through a physical animal that shows up either in an unusual way or repeatedly in a short period of time. The hummingbird that hovers for several seconds directly in front of your nose is not only a hummingbird, but is a physical representative of the spirit of all hummingbirds trying to get a message across to you. An example of repetitive appearances by an animal in symbolic form would be when you start the day with a vivid and colorful dream about a bear, then later you go to the market that day and overhear a seemingly random conversation two strangers are having about bears, and then that evening turn on the television and guess what? The TV program that pops up is about grizzly bears. Now, since they don't have cell phones or email, these are some of the ways they use to try to reach us and teach us. So when an animal or a symbol of that animal shows up in an unusual way or repeatedly, I like to look for at least 3 times in a short period of time. The spirit of that particular animal is most definitely trying to convey a message from the spirit world to you. One example of this was when one of my friends, Tim, and his wife Beth were getting ready to move to a new city. Tim was feeling extremely anxious about the move to the point of losing sleep and dropping weight. One night, a raccoon showed up in their backyard, which in the 15 years they'd lived there, he'd never seen before. He looked up raccoon in my book, Power Animals, and discovered that one of the main messages from raccoon was about resourcefulness. He felt assured at that point that he did indeed have all the necessary resources, both internal and external, for this move. And if he ever doubted that, he could always call on the spirit of raccoon to remind him. It relaxed him a great deal, and now he and his wife are living very happily in their new home, away from the hubbub of city life. I've had the good fortune to have a number of personal experiences like this, and have also heard a number of stories from others of these miraculous interventions on the part of an animal spirit guide, either represented and embodied by the physical animal or a symbol of that animal. As you'll see once you try it, a convenient and direct way to get guidance from an animal spirit guide whenever you'd like is to go through the meditation journey on this CD. But before you do, let me first define some terms, some of which you may already be familiar. The spirit world is another dimension that exists alongside our material reality, populated with non-physical beings or spirits. It's available and accessible at all times, requiring only our intention and willingness to make contact with those beings that reside there. In this alternate non-physical reality, you'll find ancestors, archangels, ascended spiritual masters, religious figures, deceased loved ones, fairies, and, for our purpose, of course, spirit animals. The term spirit guide, also known as a helping spirit or guardian spirit, is a term for any of these spiritual beings that help us with guidance, protection, inspiration, and healing. Those spirit guides that show up in animal form are called naturally animal spirit guides, or sometimes simply spirit animals. In shamanic and indigenous cultures, they're usually called totem animals or power animals, terms that are often used interchangeably, although there are some important differences in meaning. A totem animal is typically a spirit animal that is shared by a family, clan, or group. In many indigenous cultures, the family or clan you are born into has a totem animal. In modern societies, various groups also have communal totems. For example, sports teams such as the Chicago Bears or clubs such as the Elks Club. A secondary meaning for totem animal is a figurine or other likeness of a particular animal. Whether we're aware of it or not, as parents, we often give our children totem animals like stuffed teddy bears or bunny rabbits to give them comfort. The term power animal has its origins in shamanism. Power animals are very personal and specialized animal spirit guides the shaman or shamanic practitioner acquires early in their initiation into their practice, one who travels with them wherever they go, particularly when they do a shamanic journey, which is an altered state of awareness in which the practitioner sends his soul or consciousness into non-ordinary reality to receive teachings, guidance, and healings. However, what I found is that most anyone can develop a relationship with a power animal, whether or not they're a shaman or shamanic practitioner, or even have any interest in shamanism. A power animal can come to you in meditations, visions, dreams, or shamanic journeys. If you're interested in exploring this further, I'd suggest my book, Power Animals, which comes with a CD that guides you through such a journey. So, how do we get messages from these spirit animals, or for that matter, any spirit guides? Well, there are four major ways or avenues of perception: visual, auditory, kinesthetic, or cognitive. With practice, you'll discover that one of these pathways is the strongest and feels the most natural, with a secondary one that works fairly well, while the ones that aren't as strong will often develop with time and practice. Visual, for example, is when you see a dolphin a few yards from shore, or a crow that lands a couple of feet away and looks right at you. Or the animal spirit guide may show up as an image in your mind's eye or in a vivid dream. Auditory is when you hear an animal's call or the voice of an animal spirit guide in your mind giving you some directives or advice. It can also be any sound in the environment that triggers a thought about a particular animal. Kinesthetic is when you feel or sense the presence of a spirit animal, sometimes called a gut feeling or intuition. Cognitive is simply a knowing. You just somehow know that an animal spirit guide is triggering the thoughts that you're thinking at any given moment. It's also sometimes called inspiration or insight. So, unless you're already aware of which of these channels is your primary avenue for spiritual input, what you can do for the next several days is carefully observe how you make the simplest of choices. What are the most important considerations about where you live? How it feels, how it looks, or that it makes sense? How do you shop for things? How do you decide what to wear on any given morning? As you observe yourself, you begin to notice that the primary ways you connect with this material reality are also the ways you connect with and get messages from the spirit world. Do you look for and see the communications from your animal spirit guide? Do you hear their voice or feel them? Or for you, is it more of a contemplative and insightful process? Keep in mind what channels are primary for you, and with practice, you'll develop greater trust in how you perceive messages from spirit animals. So when an animal shows up in ordinary reality in an uncommon way or at unusual times, such as a dove landing on the balcony 2 feet away and looking right at you, a raccoon that's walked in your back door, or a fox that darts across your path as you're walking in the woods, it's definitely a sign from that animal spirit guide. The dove may be reminding you to stay calm, the raccoon letting you know you've got what it takes, or the fox may be suggesting that you need to be more discerning about who to trust. Or if you spot a crow in the tree outside your window 3 mornings in a row when there's usually none, it can mean that you're about to manifest something important that you've been working on. Or if you see a hummingbird repeatedly, she may be telling you that you need more joy and sweetness in your life. When you're doing the meditation journey, once an animal spirit guide shows up, and you ask them the question that you want guidance for, it's critical to pay attention to everything that you notice after you've asked the question. The information can come through visual, auditory, kinesthetic, or cognitive channels, or some combination of these four. Animal spirit guides will teach you in both cryptic and dreamlike ways, and also offer their counsel by hitting you right between the eyes with a message that's obvious. When it isn't clear what the message is, or you want to understand more about it, ask the spirit animal for clarification. You may also find that by contemplating the message over the next few hours, by letting it gently work you, you'll discover further insights, often by other signs and omens that appear in the environment. When you listen to the meditation journey, you can either sit or lie down. If you do lie down, however, lift one of your forearms up to a 90-degree angle and keep it there throughout the meditation. Now, that may seem kind of silly, but that way, if you should fall asleep, your forearm will fall and it will wake you. The meditation is a good one to do first thing in the morning if you can, so you're refreshed from a good night's sleep. Note also that you'll be going to an area in non-ordinary reality called the lower world. It's not at all the same as what we've been conditioned to think of as the underworld. The lower world is a concept that has its origins in shamanic practices and is completely safe. In most shamanic systems, this is where the animal spirits reside. Doing this meditation journey, the animal spirit guide you expect, such as your totem or power animal, may not be the one that shows up. They may send somebody else. Trust that the spirit animal that shows up will be exactly the right one to address your concerns. By the way, for this meditation journey, you'll notice the soft background rhythm is a didgeridoo, accompanied with click sticks and a drum. The didgeridoo is an instrument used for thousands of years by many of the indigenous peoples of Australia. Its droning sounds often induce a mild trance that is useful for this type of meditation. And once in a while, as you hear it, you may hear animal sounds coming through. I'm sure you'll enjoy it. Once you've completed the meditation journey, I encourage you to write out whatever you experienced in your journal. As I mentioned, the message you got from your spirit animal may be perfectly clear or somewhat cryptic and dreamlike. If it isn't clear, just let it work you through the coming days. Often further clarification will come to you through signs and omens that show up in unexpected ways in your waking life and your dreams. If you choose, you can also refer to either of my books, Animal Spirit Guides or Power Animals, or even the Power Animal Oracle cards for other possible meanings for specific visitations by spirit animals. Also, you can certainly repeat this meditation for any type of question or concern you have, and you'll get advice from the appropriate animal spirit guide. So enjoy the meditation journey, but don't try too hard. If it doesn't seem to work at first, try again. The more you practice, I've found, the more it will help you notice and understand messages from animal spirit guides in your day-to-day life. These remarkable beings want to reach us and help us. What they would like in exchange is for us to simply be grateful for their presence and gifts, and to give back to the natural world, especially to the animals, whatever we can in whatever ways we can. So have a safe and pleasant meditation journey.
This is Audible.
Tantric sex. Revitalize your sexual life learning the tantric massage, sex positions, meditation, and Kundalini awakening. Written by Crystal Castillo, narrated by Kim Speaks. Chapter 1. What is Tantra? Albeit regularly synonymous with sex, Tantra is extremely about association, regardless of whether that is with yourself or among you and a partner. All things considered, the word itself originates from a Sanskrit word, which means web or to weave energy. Practically speaking, Tantra is about enlightenment, to rise above both the sexual and spiritual planes by participating in profoundly thoughtful, free, and casual sex. Tantra meditation includes the articulation of Tantra mantras, or holy chants, Tantra breathing, and reverent thoughtfulness in meditation. Therefore, it doesn't, generally speaking, require the expert to engage in sexual relations. Or maybe the goal is to find that space of absolute non believing that is perpetually accomplished during the last phases of the sexual act and resulting climax. The mind is neither willing nor ready to hold on to any thoughts at this definitive time of sexual rapture. Moreover, the goal of Tantra meditation is to reach and keep up this state. Tantra meditation can be practiced alone or in an adequately guided Tantra for couples meditation session. It is commonly wise to practice it in a group setting, since this takes into consideration a more permanent development of synergistic Tantra energy. Under the direction of a certified Tantra expert, the full intensity of Tantra meditation is released and experienced by the participant. It opens up an immediate channel for Tantra energy to stream. In this way, releasing all pressure, stress, and strain from the mind and body. Thus, the participant can encounter unity with the infinite powers that made, support, and enable a real existence sustained by the ancient art of Tantra. Inside every one of us, explicitly in the area of the spine's tailbone, lies a center of energy that stands by to expand and change us. The thought behind Tantra meditation is to enable this energy to climb through the different focuses of intensity, the Tantra chakras, and arrive at the crown chakra. It must be noted here that this is an ancient energy, which is in its unformed state. Despite the fact that it is amazing, it can likewise hurt whenever permitted to stream without appropriate guidance. At the end of the day, Tantra meditation ought not be practiced.
This is Audible.
16 explicit dirty erotic sex stories, cuckold, bisexual, BDSM, spanking, space opera, BBW, lesbian first time, medical, threesomes, and much more. Written by Ashley Winters, Vivica Reed, Kelly Sanders, Kiara Keeley, and Kaylee Sexton. Narrated by CC Black, Katrina Medina, Jessica Howard, TK Love, Vivian Monroe, and Frank J. Miller.
Cassidy Cage Entrapment, Bisexual Cuckold Erotica, written by Kelly Sanders, narrated by Jessica Howard. Theo had always been something of a heartbreaker. His effortless charisma and piercing sapphire eyes had served him well over the years. Armed with only a wicked smile, he could charm off the knickers of almost any red-blooded female that he set his sights on. With such an abundance of potential conquests, it was inevitable that many would never get the chance to leave their notch on his bedpost. A trail of unfulfilled desire rippled in his wake, but he was just one man, and he could only satisfy so many women at once. It wasn't all one-night stands and casual flings, though. Over the years, there had been one or two special ladies with whom he had enjoyed a slightly more lasting relationship. Chloe was his latest belle, and they had been seeing each other for a few weeks, already surpassing Theo's record. She quickly became quite smitten with him, but she knew, even before their first date, that going in, she would need to maintain a level head. His reputation preceded him, and Chloe was well aware of his promiscuity. Blown Away, Big, Beautiful Woman Erotica, written by Vivica Reed, narrated by Jessica Howard. Day was going as usual for Jeremy, until he walked into his parents' house after having come home from college. That was when it all changed. As he moved into the kitchen to get something to eat, he found his mother talking to their new neighbor, and the thrill of a big, beautiful woman became a reality in his life for the first time. "Oh, hey," his mother said with a smile when she turned and saw him. "This is Mrs. Crawford. She just moved into the house next door." The pretty woman laughed. It made her large breasts bounce around a little as her chest heaved, and the 19-year-old boy managed not to stare. He kept his gaze on her chubby face and found himself smitten by a pair of dark green eyes and a full, round mouth. "No need for formalities," Mrs. Crawford said when her laughter stopped. "Seeing as we are going to be living next door to each other, just call me Rachel." "It's nice to meet you," Jeremy said when he found his voice. "Are you settling in okay?" "Kind of," she replied. "I still have a lot of boxes to unpack, though." She turned her attention back to Jeremy's mother, and as the two women chatted, it gave him a chance to sneak a few glances at his new neighbor. She looked to be in her late 30s or early 40s. Her breasts looked huge, and the top she was wearing did little to disguise that fact. The thin material clung to her curves and put them on display. The skirt was a little looser, but her impressive hips and butt could clearly be made out through it. As Jeremy kept stealing glances, he became aware that the sight of the cute face and curvy figure was starting to give him an erection. He quickly moved to the refrigerator and opened the door so that he could use it to give himself a little cover. As he looked inside, he willed his erection to go away, but it stubbornly continued to grow. It brought on a little panic, and he took his time before reaching in to grab a large carton of orange juice. When he closed the door, he kept his back to the two women as he moved to a cupboard to get a tumbler. He then went to sit at the table and tried to calm himself as he poured a drink. The sound of his name almost made him jump. Sorry," he said. "I was miles away." His mother shook her head. "I was just saying that if Rachel needs a hand with any heavy lifting, you would be more than happy to help, wouldn't you?" "Sure," he replied. "I could do that." "I'll keep that in mind," Rachel said. Jeremy smiled and kept his eyes on her face. When she turned her attention back to his mother, he couldn't help dropping his gaze to her tits. He found himself more than a little mesmerized by the impressive size, but suddenly realized she was looking at him again, and quickly brought his gaze back up. There was a slight grin on Rachel's face that seemed to show she didn't mind being stared at, but the teenage boy could still sense the heat of embarrassment on his face. "I guess I should get going," Rachel said. "Well, it was nice to meet you," Jeremy's mother said. "Just pop around if you need anything, and my strapping son will be happy to do anything you want." "Okay, that's good to know," Rachel said. When his mother wasn't looking, she flashed another grin in his direction, and he sensed his embarrassment rising. When the two women walked out of the kitchen, he worked to calm himself, and by the time his mother returned, his erection was fading away. "She seems nice," Jeremy said. "Did you meet her husband, too?" "She's moved in on her own," his mother replied. "She never came out and specifically said it, but I get the impression from our chat that she's divorced." "Oh, okay," he replied. The thought that his curvy neighbor was single served to bring his excitement back, but he was all too aware of his erection returning. "I guess I better get on with my coursework," he went on as a way of an excuse, and quickly left the kitchen to go to his bedroom. As he lay on his bed, fantasies of beautiful big women began to plague his mind, and it became the norm over the next few days and weeks. The chance to help Rachel with her unpacking never materialized, but Jeremy took every opportunity he could to try to get glimpses of her. She didn't seem exactly shy of her larger figure, and the clothes she wore usually put it on display. Jeremy went out of his way to try and chat with her whenever he could, and she seemed friendly, if not even a little flirty at times. He found out she was divorced and single, and this only served to make his growing obsession with her get worse. His thoughts were constantly on what it would be like to see her gorgeous naked body and make her big curves shake by making love to her. In reality, he guessed that it would be yet another unfulfilled dream that he'd masturbate to. But he finally found out that wasn't the case. The Saturday morning started like any other, with his mother shouting up at him to get out of bed. She and his father left to go on one of their weekend shopping trips, and he knew from experience that they wouldn't be home until later in the afternoon. He ignored the call to get up and stayed in his bed a little longer. The sound of the shears being used caught his attention, and the thought that it might be his curvy neighbor in the garden got him up. Moving to the window, he saw that he was right, and he took the opportunity to stare. The baggy top she was wearing for a change disguised her larger breasts a little, but the tighter shorts really clung to her butt and hips. The temptation for a closer look was too much to resist, and he quickly dressed in shorts and a t-shirt and went down the stairs. Rachel was still working away as he walked out to the garden, and she looked across when she heard him. Jeremy couldn't stop himself from staring as she mopped her hand across her brow to wipe the sweat away. She then pulled the collar of her top down a little to wipe the sweat on her neck and chest. "This is sticky work," she said. The words were out of Jeremy's mouth in an instant. "Can I help?" he asked. Rachel smiled. "Such a nice young boy," she said with a grin. "Of course you can." He held out the shears and he moved to leap over the fence and take them. Her hand went on his shoulder as she thanked him. And he was all too aware of the heat of the touch. It was a struggle to keep his erection from taking hold, but he fought it off. "Where should I start?" he went on. The smile on Rachel's face widened as she pointed toward a small plant. "My bush needs a trim to make it look pretty," she said. It was a cheeky comment, and Jeremy quickly grasped the double meaning. From the smile on her face, it was obvious that his neighbor was fully aware of how her comment could be taken. Jeremy couldn't stop himself from glancing down towards the front of her shorts and thinking about what lay beneath them. He turned away quickly, though, and moved to the plant to start trimming it. "So, where are your parents?" Rachel asked, as she moved to sit on a deck chair she'd set up. "They're..." The words stopped as he turned around to look and saw Rachel reclining in the deck chair with her legs spread open slightly. He tried to regain his composure as best he could. "They went out shopping," he said, as his gaze lingered on the pretty sight of his neighbor's body. "They sometimes do that on the weekends and are gone until later in the afternoon." Rachel made no effort to close her legs, and it took all his effort to look away and get back to trimming the plant. "So, you're all on your own then?" Rachel went on. It seemed like a leading question, and Jeremy gulped. Yes, for most of the day anyway." Nothing more was said as he worked to finish what he was doing, turning around when he was done. "What's next?" he asked. "Oh dear, you seem to be getting as sweaty as me," Rachel commented, as she pointed out a small tree. "Your t-shirt will get soaked. Maybe you should take it off." "Oh, fuck," thought Jeremy, as the idea of his fantasy coming to life started to form in his mind. He wasn't about to miss out on the chance, and did as he was asked. Pulling the t-shirt over his head, he moved to hang it on the fence. He could feel the heat of the older woman's eyes on him all the way, and when he glanced across, she smiled at him. Her gaze remained on him as he worked to finish trimming the branches of the tree, turning to look at her when the task was complete. "That's enough for today," she said, before he even opened his mouth to ask what was next. "Come on inside, and you can have some water or lemonade to cool you down." Jeremy watched as Rachel stood up. Following her, she moved towards the house. His gaze settled on her big, chubby ass cheeks as he walked behind her, and he wondered if he was about to see them, without the shorts. His erection was taking hold, and he tried to fight it off again. When they moved inside the kitchen, Rachel pointed him in the direction of the table. He went to sit and expected her to get the drinks. Instead, she moved to get a towel and made a show of wiping it across her face. When she pulled the neck of her top down to wipe her chest, the sight of a little cleavage came into view. Jeremy's eyes fixed on it as the towel wiped the sweat away, and there was no holding back his excitement. His cock became solid, and he crossed his legs to hide it. His nerves rose as Rachel came over to him. She held out the towel, and he reached to grab it. His hand was knocked away, though, as Rachel stroked the towel across his brow, and then moved it lower to wipe the sweat from his chest. She leaned forward as she did this, and the neck of the loose top hung down. It gave Jeremy the perfect view of her large breasts, and he held in his breath. There was no concealing that he was staring, and Rachel saw that he was straight away. "Naughty boy," she teased. "Are you looking down my top?" "What? Oh, Jeremy spluttered. "I was getting stiff again as you stared at my breasts," Rachel finished, and laughed. "No," he protested. He flinched as the towel moved lower and was pushed in his lap. Rachel laughed louder. "So what is that, then?" she asked, as she pressed on the erection. Jeremy sensed the heat of embarrassment and desire, turning his face a little red. "Sorry," he said. "Oh, don't be sorry," Rachel went on, as she pressed on the hardness. "It is such a fucking turn-on to know that you're getting horny for me." Jeremy looked up and saw Rachel grinning as he caught her gaze. She dropped the towel on the floor and grabbed at his legs to make him uncross them. Her fingertips grazed along the outline of the obvious erect length showing through his shorts. "Oh, that's nice," she said. "Teenage boys get so hard." She could feel the erection twitching and throbbing under her touch. It made her want more. "Stand up," she urged. Jeremy was on his feet in an instant, and Rachel sat on the seat. She grabbed his hips to pull him closer and leaned forward to kiss the shorts. The heat of the erection came through to her, and she started to fumble with the buttons to get the shorts out of the way. When she dragged them down, she could see the erect cock she wanted straining to be released from the confines of a pair of boxer shorts. She grabbed at the waistband to drag the underwear down and let out a rush of breath as the virility of youth was revealed. "Fuck." The word came out with her rush of breath, and she wrapped her chubby fingers around the stiff thickness. She heard a gasp from above. She looked up to see that Jeremy had his eyes tightly shut and was obviously concentrating on trying to control himself. Her gaze dropped back to his manhood, and she slowly let her fingers work up and down. She could sense the heat in her hand as she gripped tighter and pulled down to roll the foreskin off the head. The slick skin glistened, and she could see a little bubble of sticky liquid form at the small opening. Moving her head lower, she touched her tongue on pre-cum and was engulfed in the taste and scent of his manhood. It brought out the wetness between her thighs, and she squirmed around on the seat as she slowly licked around the slick skin. The taste of his manhood flooded her mouth and made her want more. She rasped her tongue on the head of the stiff shaft and enjoyed the sensation of the erection throbbing in her tight grip as she played with it. Jeremy gasped again as she leaned in to plant a kiss on the very tip of his shaft. More pre-cum smeared on her mouth, and she licked it away as she parted her lips. Pushing lower, she let some of the erect length slide into her mouth, and her hunger for his manhood surged. She kept her tongue working around the erection as she let it sink deeper in her mouth. Raising her gaze, she could see that Jeremy's eyes were still closed tightly in concentration, and she guessed that having an older woman suck on his shaft was a fantasy that would make him finish quickly. That suited her, as the urge to taste his cum was taking hold in her mind. She guessed that she would easily be able to get a horny teenage boy turned on again for more fun, and set about making him lose his first load. She sucked enthusiastically on the erection and let it slide even deeper into her mouth, until she could feel it nudging the back of her throat. It brought out her desire, and she started to work her mouth up and down the solid length. The touch of her lips working over the bulging veins was fueling her hunger for more, and she upped the pace of the blowjob until her mouth was rasping up and down the hardness at a frantic pace. The stiff shaft throbbed and jerked around as she used it, and as excitement rushed through her, she worked to take the full length. The tip of the shaft was pushing down her throat as she threw herself at it and let Jeremy make her gag, knowing it would drive him crazy. When she slowed her pace again, she looked up and could see the strain on his face as he tried to hold himself back. Working up to the tip of the shaft, she made sure a thick string of spit and pre-cum kept her lips connected to the tip as she pulled up. It remained in place as she talked. "Don't hold back," she urged, and saw the teen boy look down. I promise I'll give you more. Jeremy's eyes opened wide as he watched Rachel use her tongue to play with the string of wetness connecting his penis to her lips. She finally broke it and ducked down to kiss the tip again. The warm softness of her mouth surrounded him, and he let out a groan. He tried to relax and let the pleasure rush through him, but he tensed up as wet lips began to stroke his shaft once again. Rachel worked slowly to begin with. She brought her hand up to the heavy balls and shuddered as she wondered just how much they were storing. It spurred her on, and she started to massage the balls to relieve them of their load. At the same time, she upped the pace of the blowjob until her mouth was flashing along the erect length. There was no stopping this time as she worked to make Jeremy give her what she wanted. She was pushing down to make her lips touch on his balls and let his shaft slide down her throat. His groans got louder as his exhilaration mounted, and the strong twitching of his erection showed that he was getting close. Rachel massaged the heavy sacs in her hand more eagerly as the blowjob came to an end, and as Jeremy tensed, she knew what was coming. The first blast hit the roof of her mouth powerfully and splattered down on her tongue. The taste of cum made her shudder, and she took the erection deep so that the thick white shot down her throat. She gasped as she pulled back and grabbed at the shaft as it continued to unleash a torrent of white on her. Oh yeah, good boy, she encouraged, as the powerful splashes of white streaked across her chubby face and stuck to her skin. She gripped the shaft tight and milked it all over her face. Keeping her mouth open, she let more land on her tongue and looked up to see the wide-eyed expression of lust on the teen boy's face as he watched her. It was a massive turn-on, and she continued to stroke his manhood until she emptied his balls. The breath was rasping from her as the warmth of the cum slid down her skin. Rachel kept her mouth open to show the white on her tongue as she stroked her fingers across her face. She made a show of sucking them clean and grinned when she opened her mouth again to show that the cum was gone. She squirmed around on the seat as the heat of arousal continued to rush through her veins. It made her want more, and as she stood, she dragged the loose top over her head. Oh, fuck, Jeremy said quietly, as the full beauty of her huge tits was exposed to him. He couldn't stop himself, reaching out to grab hold. He squeezed tightly on the soft flesh and could feel the nipple poking through the bra. Rachel grabbed her shorts to drag them lower and bring her big panties into view. She sat down again and parted her legs. Slipping a hand between her thighs, she stroked on her panties and the wetness smeared on her fingertips. She grabbed hold of Jeremy and, after dragging him to his knees, wiped her fingers on his mouth. He licked hungrily at the taste of her as his gaze settled between her legs. You don't need permission, she teased and laughed. The laughter stopped, though, as Jeremy dropped his head down and kissed on her panties. The taste of her femininity grew stronger, and he flicked out his tongue to lick at the wet stain on the silky material. His touch rasped along the outline of her lips, and Rachel squirmed around and gasped as the excitement rushed through her. She grabbed the teen boy's head to pull him onto her, and he licked harder. The soft material was pushed inside her cherry as he tried to get his tongue inside, but he forced back against the pressure on his head. It gave him a little room to work, and he grabbed at the edge of the panties. Rachel shuddered as the silky covering was dragged out of the way to reveal her naked glory to the eager gaze of a teen boy. She grabbed his head to pull him forward again, and this time the kiss was on her naked skin. She groaned as Jeremy's tongue snaked out to lick at her and pushed her ass forward to the edge of the seat. Her slit lips were opened up as the pressure of the touch increased, and she groaned as his tongue slipped inside her. Jeremy pushed forward to burrow as deep as he could in the wet hole and licked frantically at the wetness on the slick cherry walls. His lips pressed against soft skin, and as the pressure on the back of his head increased, he was held in place to lick out her hole. He worked his tongue around as it got soaked, and the taste spurred him on for more. Bringing his fingers to the top of Rachel's cherry mound, he sought out her clit to play with it. She bucked up from the seat as the heat of the touch took hold and writhed around. Her body responded to the sensual play, and she could feel the arousal bringing her closer to the climax she was craving. She held the teen boy on her as he struggled to back off, and when she finally relented, grinned as he gasped for breath. Jeremy was given only a few seconds to recover before he was dragged forward again. His tongue plunged back in her, and his head was engulfed by the soft flesh as Rachel closed her thighs to trap him in place. The scent and touch of her became his whole world, and he licked frantically as he pushed his tongue deep. When the pressure on his head finally eased, he pulled back a little. "Ravage me with your fingers," Rachel urged, and he didn't need to be told twice. He watched as the older woman worked his fingers to her clit and stroked touches on the little bud. Forcing his fingers into the chubby folds of skin, he sought out the slick entrance and teased his fingers around it. Rachel jolted up as he pushed inside, and she groaned as the penetration of his fingers plunged deep. "Do it roughly," she urged, as he started to move his fingers in and out. Quickly, working up to 3 fingers, he rammed them in hard and fast as Rachel continued to play with her love bud. Her back arched as the excitement of the touches played on her senses, until she started to completely lose control. The breath rushed from her as the heat of orgasm came to the boiling point. Jeremy leaned down to lick at her fingers as he continued to work her cherry, and it was the touch that finally proved too much for her. Rachel's butt jolted up from the seat as the climax came to life, and sent a rush of heat flooding through her. She held her breath as her body tensed, and then let out a loud groan as the shudders racked her chubby body and made her flesh shake. She was taken to the heights of pleasure as Jeremy continued to plunge his fingers deep into her tightening hole, until her groan turned to a squeal as the orgasm held her in its grip. The tension of the moment finally broke, and she collapsed back to the seat. Her chest was heaving, and she could see the way the teen boy was staring at her large tits. A glance down showed that licking her out had started to get him stiff again, and she knew how to bring him fully erect. Sitting up, she made him stand and dragged the bra from her tits. The large mounds sagged down a little, and she cupped a touch around them. "You want to play with these, don't you?" she teased. Jeremy nodded his head and gasped as she reached to grab his stiffening shaft. She brought the tip to a nipple and played with it on the little bud. Squeezing the head of his thick shaft, she tried to open up the little slit at the end to tease it on her nipple. His manhood was quickly becoming fully erect, and she pulled it to her cleavage. Pulling her tits apart, she waited for the teen boy to move forward and then wrapped the soft flesh around him. He groaned as she stroked her tits on his shaft, and his entire length was lost in the soft flesh. This moment was something he fantasized about so much, but the reality was even better. His groans got louder as Rachel stroked the soft skin of her tits on him, and he could feel his body responding. The throbbing of his manhood started to drive him crazy, and he thrust forward to drive himself into the soft warmth. It was one of the best moments of his life. To look down and see big tits being used on him, the sight of his cum still clinging to Rachel's face stoked his desire even more, and he threw himself forward. The thought of unloading more cum on the soft mounds started to grow in his mind, but his older lover seemed to have other ideas. She continued to move her tits up and down his shaft until she wanted more, and then pushed him back. Sliding to the floor, Rachel turned to rest her upper body on the chair. It left her on her knees with her ass at the mercy of a teen boy. He grabbed at the waistband of her panties as he dropped behind her and peeled the silky material down her thighs to expose the chubby ass cheeks below. Jeremy grabbed handfuls of flesh and squeezed tightly to leave finger marks on the skin. Pulling the ass cheeks apart got him a glimpse of Rachel's tiny, puckered hole, and he moved forward to bring the tip of his shaft to it. Rocking his hips, he brushed a touch back and forth over the tight hole, and a surge of excitement rushed through his body. He could barely believe his luck as he moved his hands to the curvy hips and took a tight hold. Pushing forward, he stroked the underside of his manhood on her asshole and shuddered at the thrill of the moment. Rachel reached behind herself and grabbed her butt cheeks to pull them wider. "Take me," she urged. Jeremy grinned as he savored the moment he found himself in. It was better than he had ever imagined, having a big, beautiful woman on her knees and encouraging him to take her. He wrapped fingers around the base of his shaft and worked the tip onto the chubby folds of skin. The wetness of her cherry smeared on his shaft as he worked it along slick cherry lips. He He finally settled the head of his erection in place, and shuddered as he pushed forward. The slick lips yielded to him, and he spread them apart as he slipped inside. His groan sounded loud as he pushed forward and plunged all the way inside the soft warmth. His animal hunger for sex came to the fore, and he gripped at Rachel's chubby hips to take a tight hold. Pulling himself forward, he stirred his shaft around in her wet hole as he prepared himself for a furious onslaught. His thrusts were rough and energetic from the start, and his mature lover groaned as her body was rocked by the deep strokes into her wet hole. Jeremy slapped his midriff on the big ass with a growing passion as he threw himself forward. Having cummed already, it meant he was able to control himself a little more, and he sped up and slowed the pace of lovemaking as he took full advantage of the delights of a mature woman's body. Rachel started to push herself back, and the sound of their naked skins slapping together filled the kitchen. Her moans of ecstasy began to get to Jeremy, and he could sense himself losing control. He wanted the sex to go on, but was sure there would be more to come after. It spurred him on to more frantic exertions as he pushed himself towards another release. The tingle in his balls grew as he had sex with his big, beautiful neighbor, the frantic strokes of his erect shaft intensifying until it finally became too much. His low groan got louder as he got closer to unloading, and he finally rammed forward with a forceful thrust as the cum started to rise. His body shook as he grabbed tightly onto Rachel's hips and pulled himself deep into her femininity. The powerful spurts of thick white splashed on slick walls as he gave his lover a second load of cum. He continued to thrust forward as his shaft jerked out sticky strings of white, and he couldn't help pulling back to splatter some cum on her chubby ass cheeks before he finished. Rachel groaned as the warmth of the sticky mess dirtied her ass and stroked her fingers through it. "Dirty boy," she teased as she played with the cum. She finally turned and made Jeremy get to his feet so that she could lick his shaft clean. "I think I could get used to having you around to help me." "I can come back then?" he asked. Rachel laughed. "Oh, you can come back all right," she replied. "I like it when men worship my body, and I love seeing how hard I get you." She stood up. "Now I need a shower, though," she went on. Jeremy pulled on his shorts and underwear and turned to leave. He hadn't taken a step before he was stopped. "Where do you think you're going?" Rachel said with a laugh. "You made this mess, so you better clean it up." She grabbed his hand and pulled him towards the kitchen door. Jeremy knew he was going to get his hands on every inch of her big, beautiful body as he washed her clean in the shower and hoped it would lead to more as the day wore on. "Oh, damn," he mouthed quietly as he watched the naked ass waddling in front of his face as they walked up the stairs. The end.
Naughty Nurse's Dilemma, Lesbian First-Time Sex. Written by Ashley Winters, narrated by T.K. Love. It was the third night in a row that Megan had nothing better to do. She found working the night shift at Nature's Nursing Home relatively easy. She ensured that all the residents had a restful night, and it allowed her to get caught up on some much-needed reading as she studied for her master's degree. But sometimes Megan wanted something better to do with her time as the long hours stretched on till dawn. Megan was 3 hours into her shift when she stopped in the nurse's station for a fresh cup of coffee. Afterwards, she'd started making her rounds again to make sure all the residents were fast asleep. But as Megan was coming out of the nurse's station, she almost ran into a petite blonde who looked dazed and confused. "Oh, I'm so sorry," she said as she backed up a few feet. Megan smiled warmly at her, noticing how perky and large her breasts were as she held the clipboard tightly to her chest. "I'm just trying to find the head nurse, Megan Walters." "You found her," Megan said with a wink as she took a sip of her coffee, eyeing the girl from head to toe. Megan had to give the woman credit for having a killer body. "I see. I'm Cassandra, the new intern," she explained as she stuck out her hand. Megan shook it, enjoying the way her hand felt warm and smooth in hers. "It's nice to meet you, Cassandra. You'll have to forgive me, I did not know I was getting a new intern tonight," Megan replied as she gestured for Cassandra to follow her down the hallway. "It's fine," Cassandra said with a small smile. Megan could tell that the younger woman was nervous, and it was something about her shyness that really turned Megan on. "Let me show you around. I was just about to start my rounds, so this will be a good way to learn about our residents. and get a heads up on some of the more rowdier ones, Megan said as she led Cassandra through the building. Together they peeked into each room, confirming that all residents were asleep and resting well. Megan gave special instructions on those who had declining health and those who could be a bit grabby. I did an internship last semester at another nursing home. I feel more prepared this time around, Cassandra spoke up as they finished the round. It would be another 2 hours before Megan did another round, being able to monitor most of the residents from the cameras in the nurses' station. Good to hear. I'm sure you'll fit right in here. There's only us and the security guard on duty, Megan said as she settled into the chair at the nurses' station. You're free to work on anything while we wait to do our next rounds. Oh, I really didn't bring anything with me. I figured we'd be preparing prescriptions for the morning or something like that, Cassandra admitted, her cheeks flushing as though she was embarrassed. Megan was really starting to get wet between her legs at the sight of such an innocent, inexperienced woman. Well, I can think of a few things we could do to pass the time, Megan said as she stood and motioned for Cassandra to follow her. She led Cassandra down the hallway to an empty bedroom, and as Cassandra followed her into the dark room, she closed and locked the door behind them. Before Cassandra could ask what she had planned for them to do, Megan wrapped her arms around Cassandra's waist before she pressed her lips to hers. Megan could feel the way Cassandra went stiff in her arms as she kissed her tenderly, loving the plush feeling of her lips as she kissed her. Then, as she parted her lips with their tongue, she felt Cassandra relax, a moan escaping her mouth as their tongues began to dance together. Cassandra wrapped her arms around Megan's shoulders as she deepened the kiss. She'd never kissed a woman before, and couldn't deny how wonderful it felt to have Megan come on to her so quickly. She never considered herself very attractive, and thought how exciting it was to attract someone as beautiful as Megan. A thrill of excitement ran through her as Megan sucked on her bottom lip. The fact that they were making out while at work was really starting to turn Cassandra on. Megan eventually pushed Cassandra towards the bed that was positioned in the middle of the room. Cassandra went willingly, allowing Megan to guide her down onto the bed as they continued to make out. But the more she enjoyed tasting Megan's tongue, the more her pussy moistened. She raised her hips and started to rub her core against Megan's, causing the other woman to moan against her mouth. Let's get these clothes off you, Megan said as she leaned up and started to pull off Cassandra's clothes. She loved the sight of Cassandra's bare chest and quickly took the opportunity to fondle her large breasts, enjoying the feeling of her soft skin and hard nipples underneath her thumb. Cassandra arched her back as she pressed her breasts into Megan's eager hands, loving how the older woman teased her nipples. Cassandra started to moan as Megan pulled and twisted her nipples, sending waves of pleasure throughout her body. When Megan leaned down and took one of her hard nipples into her mouth, Cassandra thought she would come right there and then. She moaned softly, loving the wet feeling of the tongue twirling around her sore nipples that Megan had pinched into erect peaks. Now it felt wonderful as Megan sucked and licked her right nipple before moving to the other, her hands massaging her breasts as she started to buck her hips. Someone seems impatient, Megan said in a husky voice as she started to grind her hips against Cassandra's exposed pussy. It was clear to Megan that Cassandra was thoroughly enjoying how she was teasing her body, and with so much time to kill, she was taking her time with the younger woman, planning on showing Cassandra the best night of her life. Megan lowered her hand to Cassandra's throbbing clit. She started to rub the small rosebud in soft circles, causing Cassandra to start panting. Megan was soft and gentle at first, but then would quicken her pace, pressing harder till her legs started to quiver. Then she would slowly back down again, loving the sweet smell that was spreading through the room as Cassandra became very wet between the legs. Megan slid off the bed and slowly undressed Cassandra, bending over as she pulled off her scrubs to give the other woman a good, clear view of her shaven pussy. Megan could hear Cassandra panting as she finished undressing and came back to the bed. Cassandra watched with curious eyes as Megan straddled her waist over Cassandra's face, allowing her to sink her pussy onto Cassandra's waiting lips. Megan took a deep breath, inhaling Cassandra's sweet scent before she stuck out her tongue and started licking Cassandra's clit. Megan couldn't help but giggle as she heard Cassandra moan, loving the horny sound as it escaped Cassandra's mouth. Then Cassandra started to become curious as she raised her head and started to lick Megan's pussy lips, her juices coating her tongue as she discovered for herself just how sweet the other woman was. She found it rather pleasing and gripped either side of her thighs as she pulled Megan down onto her face. Megan wasn't expecting Cassandra to be so eager and let out a long moan of her own as she felt her probing tongue arouse her pussy. Megan began to suck and lick on Cassandra's clit with eagerness, wanting to send the younger woman over the edge as she pressed hard with her tongue. Cassandra's hips started to buck wildly before her legs clamped down on Megan's head, holding her in place as she continued to lick wildly. Cassandra buried her mouth into Megan's pussy as she moaned, the vibration of it almost causing Megan to come with her. As Cassandra started to pant as she rested her head down, Cassandra continued to lightly lick her clit, wanting to get her hot and ready for round 2. As Cassandra started to moan again, raising her head once more to lick Megan's pussy, Megan started to work on Cassandra's pussy, inserting 2 fingers slowly into the woman's soaking wet mound. She was surprised just how wet Cassandra was as she pushed her fingers deep within Cassandra, while her tongue danced around her clit. Megan felt Cassandra moaning against her pussy once more, the sensation almost enough to make her come. Megan worked Cassandra's pussy slowly, moving her fingers deep within her before slowly pulling them out almost all the way before driving them back in again, wanting Cassandra to feel every inch of her fingers as she worked them. Then, when Megan was certain that her pussy was nice and loose, she inserted a 3rd finger to really fill her. Cassandra was lost in an ocean of ecstasy as she felt Megan slowly work her pussy. She desperately wanted Megan to quicken her pace and feel her pussy orgasm on her fingers. She'd never been fingered so tenderly before, and the feeling of it was like being teased. She was enjoying sucking and licking on Megan's pussy lips and started to experiment with sticking her tongue deep within Megan. She figured she was doing a good job, as Megan started to grind her pussy into Cassandra's eager tongue. Cassandra thought she'd never tasted anything so sweet in her entire life, as she eagerly tongue-fucked Megan's pussy, her face being covered in her juices. As Megan began to moan, the vibration of it on Cassandra's clit almost sent her over the edge. Her legs started to tremble as she felt another orgasm quickly building deep within her pussy. Cassandra raised her hands up to Megan's thighs to her thick ass and spread her cheeks wide, giving her something to grip on as she began to move Megan's hips into a rhythm, her pussy bouncing up and down on her tongue. Megan began to finger Cassandra faster, her orgasm coming quickly as Cassandra started to handle her with more eagerness. Megan was surprised by the way Cassandra was penetrating her with her tongue, like she was a pro at it. Never had Megan been so well licked and sucked by a woman's mouth before, and she was quickly thinking that Cassandra was going to be her new favorite. Though she'd seduced many of the nurses she worked with at the nursing home, none of them had pleasured her quite like Cassandra. As Megan began to come hard, she started to pound Cassandra with her fingers, the sound of her fingers fiercely fucking her pussy filling the air. Megan buried her face in Cassandra's clit as she moaned loudly, her pussy spasming over Cassandra's tongue as she continued to lick deep inside of her. As Megan came down from her high, she raised her hips off Cassandra's face, giving the woman a moment to catch her breath as she continued to pump her fingers in and out of Cassandra's pussy. She couldn't wait to make the other woman come again, but wanted to take her time so she would come harder. Cassandra raised her hand to her pussy and started to press 3 fingers into her own pussy, the feeling heavenly as Megan rocked her hips forward, wanting to feel her fingers filling her completely. Cassandra was enjoying the way Megan's pussy tightened around her fingers as she pressed them deep within the woman. Her pussy was so wet that they just slid right in, the feeling both hot and moist. Then Cassandra pulled them slowly out before forcing them deep within her again, forcing her pussy to loosen and take the beating Cassandra was ready to give her. Though Megan had been slow and tender with her, Cassandra was eager to please Megan and started finger-fucking her fast, her fingers disappearing deep as Megan began to suck on her clit once more. "Oh, baby, you're going to make me come," Megan moaned as she started to finger Cassandra, trying to match the other woman's pace as Cassandra fingered her so fast she was certain that this was the best pounding she'd ever received. "Oh, yes, finger me, just like that," Megan moaned before she buried her face in Cassandra's clit, sucking and licking the throbbing bud in an attempt to make the other woman come quickly. Cassandra couldn't take it anymore as she bucked her hips wildly as she came. She'd never come so hard in her life as she cried out in pleasure using Megan's clit to quiet her moans. She felt Megan come then, her pussy clenching onto her fingers as she fingered her as fast as she could, pressing her fingers deep into Megan's pussy right after pulling out. Megan was moaning loudly, even with her mouth pressed firmly to her clit, the vibration prolonging Cassandra's orgasm as her hips continued to buck. It took several minutes for Cassandra and Megan to calm their bodies. As Megan pulled her fingers from deep within Cassandra's pussy, Cassandra whimpered, already missing the feeling of being filled. She pulled her fingers from Megan then, licking the cum off them as she realized just how delicious Megan tasted. It was a taste that she was certain she would come to enjoy again and again. As Megan climbed off of the bed, Cassandra was certain that they'd get dressed soon and start the next round of checks. But when Megan came back to the bed and urged Cassandra to roll over, she was curious what the woman had in mind. "Get on all fours, my dear," Megan said in a soft voice. Whatever Megan had planned for her excited her once again, as she rolled onto her stomach and then got onto all fours. Megan moved onto the bed and got behind Cassandra, planning to pleasure her new friend's body once more before they had to get back to work. Cassandra gasped as she felt something stiff press against both her pussy and tight pink ass at the same time. "What is that?" Cassandra asked as she tried to look over her shoulder. "The ear tubes of my stethoscope," Megan said with a chuckle as she gripped onto the V-shape of the stethoscope till each ear tube was disappearing deep within Cassandra's wet pussy and tight ass. "Oh my god," Cassandra panted out as she felt the familiar device sink deep within her. She'd never had someone play with her ass before and wondered why she never tried it. The feeling was exceptional as the long ear tubes were buried within her ass and pussy. Then Megan began to pull them back out real slowly before pushing them back in again. Cassandra knew she'd never be able to listen to another heartbeat without getting extremely wet as Megan quickened her pace, pulling and pushing the ear tubes. When Megan slapped Cassandra's round ass, Cassandra cried out in pleasure. She was enjoying the way Megan was treating her roughly. Megan would start to massage a spot on her ass right before she would slap it, causing Cassandra's pussy and ass to clench onto the ear tubes as Megan pushed them deep within her. "Oh, yes," Cassandra whimpered in pleasure, encouraging Megan to continue slapping her ass. Megan complied, loving the way her ass bounced every time she slapped it. When she felt Cassandra had had enough of her slaps, she focused solely on the speed and force of the ear tubes, double penetrating Cassandra's holes, using 2 hands to grip onto the stethoscope as she pounded Cassandra hard. "Oh, I'm going to come," Cassandra cried out as she started to rock her hips back, loving the feeling of being penetrated in both of her holes. Her third orgasm came then, crashing over her body. She was certain her cum was spurting out of her pussy as Megan continued to fuck her quickly, causing Cassandra's orgasm to continue for longer than it had ever in her life. Eventually, Megan pulled the ear tubes from deep within Cassandra, a sucking sound coming from her ass as her pussy continued to drip large amounts of cum. Megan couldn't resist as she stuck her finger within Cassandra's pussy and pulled it out so she could taste the woman's sweet juices. Afterwards, they took the time to shower, washing each other thoroughly as their soapy hands freely roamed over each other. Megan desperately wanted to have Cassandra eat her out once more as the hot water ran over their bodies, but she knew that they would need to check on the residents. She also didn't want to be discovered by the security guard, who would more than likely want to watch while he got off as well. After they had finished showering and getting dressed, they worked together to tidy the room before leaving and returning to the nurse's station. With another cup of coffee, Megan and Cassandra made their rounds at the nursing home as all the residents continued to sleep peacefully. But when they settled down back at the nurse's station, they were both faced with the same dilemma from earlier. "So, what would you like to do now? We have about an hour before we need to start getting things ready for the morning crew," Megan said as she started to make a mental list of everything they'd have to get done before the night was over. But as Cassandra smiled at her, pushing her chair back so she could kneel between the woman's legs, Megan knew that she would be getting little done tonight. The end. By the Older Milf, space opera erotica, written by Kaylee Sexton, narrated by T.K. Love. "Tom! Hey, Tom! Wait up!" The sound of the high-pitched feminine shout rose above the murmur of deeper voices around Tom Connery and brought him to a stop. He heard the grumbles of the newly graduated Galaxy commandos who had to force their way past him in the narrow passageway when he turned to look back. The halo of silver blonde hair stuck out like a sore thumb in a sea of military buzz cuts, and he knew who it was. It made him start fighting back against the tide of soldiers heading for the battlecruiser. "You're such an asshole, Connery," a voice complained. "Fuck you," Tom replied, without even looking to see who tossed the insult in his direction. He kept pushing his way through the crowd of soldiers, slowly moving in the other direction, until he finally got to the very back of them and came face to face with Sapphire. He laughed when she threw herself at him, but a fierce kiss choked off the sound, and he closed his eyes to enjoy a last moment with her. She finally backed off and ran her hands through her hair as she smiled at him. His gaze slid down the silver dress that clung tightly to her voluptuous figure, and it brought home what he was leaving behind. "I can't believe you're going," she said, and grabbed his hand to pull him to the wall. The way she leaned in against him made him all the more conscious of her luscious curves. It gave him memories of being naked in bed with her, and he felt a rush of hot blood. "This day is always bound to come," he said. "Yeah, I know." Sapphire let out a wicked laugh before going on. "I'm going to miss those muscles, though." Tom looked down at a hand rubbing across his chest. His relationship with Sapphire had always been on-off, and he knew that he likely wasn't the only man she'd been with during their time together. She was a free spirit and did whatever she wanted. That had been fine with him. He got all the sex he wanted, without the commitment usually needed, and enjoyed every minute of it. "I'm going to miss a lot about you," he said as he caressed a hand over the curve of her hip. It brought another wicked laugh from Sapphire's lips, and she leaned in to kiss him again. Her hands came around his neck as she pushed her body against his, and he knew she wouldn't miss the erection she was bringing to life. He never could control himself around her, and there seemed little point in trying now. She kept herself pressed against him when the kiss ended, and he could feel the pulsing throb of a hot-blooded desire growing stronger. "You'll get me in trouble," he joked. "Why?" she asked, and forced a hand between their bodies to press her palm against the swelling hardness. "Isn't this how Galaxy Commandos salute their superior officers?" "Do you want me to get slung in a cell on my first day of service?" Tom said. "I thought you got a week of rest and recuperation before that," Sapphire replied. "That doesn't start until we reach Socrates 5, Tom said. "I'm considered on active duty until I step off the battle cruiser at the other end of this trip." "And then you'll have your last hurrah before soldier life kicks in at Commando Post 7. "Something like that," Tom replied. "Why don't you jump a transport ship and meet me for the last week there?" "Not me. I've no intention of going off-world." "Socrates 5 is hardly a backwater," Tom said. "It's got a large civilian colony." His words were brought to a stop by a finger on his lips that pulled away when he was quiet. "I know," Sapphire said. "I have an aunt who lives there." "Great, then stay with her for a week." "Can't do it," Sapphire told him. The rueful smile. "But you can." He frowned when she pressed something into his hand and lifted up the piece of paper to see a name and address on it. "It's her details," Sapphire said. "I spoke to her the other day and she made the offer when I told her you were about to head for her home planet." "Oh, I don't want to impose on her," Tom said, and tried to hand the paper back. "I can get a guest house or hotel easily enough when I arrive." "I know you could, but now you don't have to," Sapphire said and smiled. "She'll look after you."
But
Her lips pressed on his to silence him this time, and he could somehow tell it was the last one they would share. Sapphire's arms slung around his neck, and she pressed her face onto his shoulder when the kiss ended. "Look me up when we make it back here," she said when she finally pushed herself away from him. "I'll be sure to do that," he replied and smiled. "You better get going," she told him. Tom looked to see his colleagues now much further along the passageway and knew it was time for him to catch up. "I'll miss you," he said when he turned his gaze back on Sapphire. "Yeah, it's been fun," she said and smiled. "Say hi to my aunt for me." She turned to walk away before Tom could say anything else, and he watched her for a few seconds before looking down at the paper in his hand. "Connery!" The harsh shout from his commanding officer made him react. He shoved the paper in his pocket and ran along the passageway to catch up. "I hope this slack attitude isn't going to continue," the officer said. "No, sir," Tom replied, as he moved past and caught up with a line of soldiers still waiting to make their way on board the cruiser. He was the last to do so, and the sound of boisterous voices surrounded him as he moved around to find a free seat. When he finally sat down, he strapped himself in. The noise died down when the officer came on board. He moved to the communication board and pressed a button. It was followed by the sound of a voice. "Bridge here." "All present and accounted for," the officer said. "We can get going." "Roger that." The officer took his seat, and Tom glanced back to see the large bay doors closing. He was on the verge of life as a fully fledged Galaxy Commando, and he closed his eyes as the thrum of the engines came to life. The cruiser slowly maneuvered out of the docking bay before the main thrusters were engaged, and suddenly everyone was pinned back in their seats as the ship picked up acceleration until it finally jumped to hyperdrive. The sudden quiet and still was unsettling for a few seconds, but the murmur of voices eventually came alive. Tom was in no real mood to join in the chatter, so settled his head against the back of his seat and closed his eyes. Before long, memories of Sapphire were playing on his mind, and it was the last thing he needed. He managed to rid himself of the erection she gave him before he got to the cruiser, and didn't want it returning. It made him reach in the chest pocket of his combat jacket and push his fingers right to the bottom to find the pill he'd been given. Sleeping was the best way to get through interplanetary journeys, so he took the medication, and the quick-acting effects knocked him out. A smack across the back of his head brought him out of the drug-induced slumber. "What the fuck?" he complained in a drowsy voice, but only got laughter in his response to his protest. He stretched his arms up above his head as his mouth opened wide in a yawn, and it suddenly dawned on him that he could feel the thrum of the engines. He sat up straight to look around. "We're here?" he asked when he turned to the soldier next to him. "Almost. We came out of hyperdrive around 15 minutes ago." "Shit," Tom let out as he rubbed the back of his neck. His intention had never been to sleep for the whole journey, but it seemed the pill he'd been given was a lot stronger than he realized. He rubbed at his eyes to drive away the last of the drowsiness, and knew they were probably on the verge of docking at their destination when the sound of the commanding officer's voice rose above the din. "Listen up. I understand this is your last week before active services start for real, but I need you all at Command Post 7 1 week from today. No exceptions. You don't want to spend your first day of life as a Galaxy Commando in a cell, so make sure you are present and correct when the first roll call is taken at 1300 hours on the 1st of June. I've been where you are and know the temptations. Make sure you keep it under control so you're ready for duty." There were a few calls of yes sir in response before the officer sat down again. It wasn't long before the bump of the ship docking was felt. The bay doors then opened and the scramble to disembark got underway. Tom joined the others in collecting his gear before they were led to the exit of the transport station. Stepping outside meant they were free for a week, and he was considering what to do when he heard the shout. "Are you heading for a guest house, Tom?" He contemplated his answer as he walked across to his friend. "Probably," he said, "but I have to go and see someone first. Do you know the place you're staying in?" "Dewey's been here before, so he's taken us to a place," Sam replied in turn. "Hey, Dooley, what's the name again?" "The 99 Guest House," Dooley shouted back. "Cool," Tom said. "I'll try and catch up with you there." "Who is it you have to see?" Sam asked. "Friend of a friend," Tom replied, and remembered Sapphire's comment about saying hi to her aunt. "I've got a message to pass on." "Okay, I'll see you when I see you," Sam replied and walked over to the others preparing to head for the guest house. Tom decided to wait for the rush to die down and went to sit on a bench at the side of the transport station. He watched the taxis rising up to the sky lane above them and zipping off in the direction of the civilian colony. The line of soldiers gradually dwindled away, and he finally stood up to get himself a ride. When he was sitting in the back of the cab, he got the paper from his pocket and leaned forward. "Do you know this place, buddy?" he asked. The driver checked the address and nodded, without saying a word. That suited Tom, and he settled down on the back seat to watch the view as they slowly rose up. The journey lasted around 20 minutes, with the cab finally coming down from the sky lane to stop in front of a building. "This is you," the driver said. Tom paid the fare, then got out. He slung his bag over his shoulder and suddenly wondered if he'd done the right thing in coming. The taxi took off, though, and it was too late to change his mind. Moving forward, he walked inside the building and checked the apartment number. It was on the second floor, so he just walked up the stairs. The sudden thought that Sapphire's aunt might not even be in flitted through his head when he reached the door. "Let's hope she is," he muttered and reached out to ring the bell. The sound of movement showed there was someone inside, and Tom was confronted by an older version of Sapphire when the door opened. It was uncanny how alike Ruby was to her niece, although, if anything, she had a more voluptuous figure. "Mrs. Reynolds?" he queried. "I'm Tom Connery," Ruby replied and smiled. "Sapphire told you about my offer." "Yeah, I met her just before I left, and she told me you'd be happy to put me up for a few days." "And she was right," Ruby said and stood aside. "But no calling me Mrs. Reynolds. It makes me sound old. Call me Ruby." "Okay," Tom agreed, and he stepped across the threshold. "Do you live here alone?" "Yes, it's just me," she said and closed the door. "Come on, and I'll show you the room you can use." Tom's gaze dropped to the swing of the chiffon dress Ruby wore as she led him along to the room. It was a seductive sight on such curvy hips, and he found himself hoping that she was every bit as free-spirited as her niece. If that was the case, he might find himself in for a week to remember. He couldn't be sure, though, and decided to play it by ear and see what happened. "This is you in here," Ruby said and opened a door. She ushered him into a bedroom, then followed inside. "There's an adjoining bathroom, so you can have a shower and get yourself settled in," she went on. "Are you hungry?" "Yeah, I came straight here from the transport station," Tom replied. "Is coffee and sandwiches okay?" "Great," Tom said. "It's really good of you to put me up, and if you need any payment, I'll—" Ruby put up a hand to stop him. "There's no need for money," Ruby replied. "Sapphire only had good things to say about you, and I'm glad to help out. Have a shower, and I'll get things ready for when you're finished." Tom nodded and watched as she left the room. He put his bag down on the bed and had a look around before unpacking his gear to store it away. A check in the bathroom showed there was a towel, so he stripped off his clothes and walked through. Moving to the shower head in the corner of the room, he switched it on and got under the water. The hot jets felt refreshing after the long journey, and he tilted his head back to let them rain down on his face. He stood like that for a while before finally picking up the soap to wash himself, and was almost finished when he heard the noise. It made him turn, and he saw Ruby standing at the open door staring in at him. There was a moment of silence before she spoke. Sapphire was right about your muscles. I get why she'll miss them. Tom was aware of her gaze roaming over his toned physique, but did nothing to cover himself and suspected the intention all along had been to get him in the apartment for sex. Hell, it might even have been a plan by Sapphire to give her anti-muscular soldier boy as a gift, but he was more than happy about it. Are you coming in? He asked. You Galaxy Commandos are badass boys, Ruby joked before pulling off her chiffon dress to reveal she was naked below. Gorgeous milf, Tom murmured under his breath as she walked towards him. The way she threw herself against his naked body reminded him of Sapphire, and he closed his eyes as he was slammed against the tiles. Their mouths came together in a hungry kiss, and he could feel his erection coming to life against her belly. A hand slithered between their wet bodies to get to it, and he heard the appreciative groan when the kiss ended. Ruby's fingers curling around his stiffening cock was enough to bring it fully erect, and he heard her seductive chuckle when she brushed her lips against his ear. So hard for me, she let out. Her lips came back to his as she squeezed tightly, and the throb of hot-blooded lust grew stronger. He pushed her back and tried to duck his head down to her tits, but she wasn't about to be denied what she so obviously wanted. But you know it's ladies first, young man, she teased as she leaned in to kiss on his smooth, buff chest. Tom gave in and settled back against the wall to enjoy the attention of an older woman for the first time in his life. He closed his eyes as Ruby's tongue circled around one nipple, then the other before she sucked on them. The touch of her lips sliding lower on his body made him shudder, and he let out a gasping breath when her tongue teased across his solid six-pack. She kept going lower until the soft underside of her chin rubbed against the head of his throbbing manhood. Now you can give me the payment I want, she teased as she dropped to her knees in front of him. She looked up as she nuzzled her cheek against his erection and held the eye contact when she lifted a hand to cup his balls. Are these full for me? She asked as she massaged them. Yes, Tom groaned. Ruby's hand came higher, and his legs weakened as she lightly stroked her fingers up and down his stiff length. She finally gripped harder as she slid her hand back to the base, and it rolled the foreskin off the thick head. The fluttering touch of her tongue around it took his breath, and he could feel his excitement mounting. There was no taking his eyes from the sight of her tongue tormenting the sensitive head of his cock, until the view was blocked when she pressed her lips right on the tip. His breathing grew ever more ragged as he felt his erection being taken into the soft wetness of her mouth. It made him arch his back to ease his hips forward, and she let his cock slide further between her lips. She started to bob her head, and he immediately felt himself struggling to hold back the aching rush of pleasure. Her mouth slid lower, and he knew he was in trouble when she pulled her hand away from the base. The waggling of her head let her push down further until she started to deep-throat his cock. The unbelievable sensation made Tom groan loudly, and he gave the warning when he knew he wouldn't be able to stop the pressure in his balls boiling over if she kept going. You'll make me come. It only seemed to encourage Ruby to push harder, and she cupped her fingers around his balls again as she began to bob her head faster. There was no resisting such an exquisite moment, and Tom finally gave up trying. He rocked his head back against the wall as he arched his back, and his excitement was brought right to the point of release. His loud groan made Ruby take every hard inch of his quivering cock, and she glanced up to catch his gaze. The eye contact was too much for him. He shuddered as he stared down at the side of her nose buried in his pubic hair, and her lips kissing on his heavy balls. His hips bucked, and the rush of hot bliss hit hard as he unloaded a thick stream of cum down her throat. It didn't make her pull back, and he stared at the rapid blinking of her eyes as he flooded her throat with more sticky blasts. It brought out his excitement to fever pitch, and he pushed his hips forward until the thick streams of his seed finally began to weaken, then died away completely. A shudder rippled through him as he slowly pulled her mouth back to the tip of his cock, then slurped away the last dribbles of sticky white from the little opening at the tip of his cock. Feeling relaxed now? She teased in a hoarse voice when she looked up. I think I need to lie down, he said. You've turned my legs to jelly. Then we better get you on the bed, Ruby replied. She got to her feet and turned the water off before grabbing the towel to quickly dry them both. Tom let out a gasp when his fading erection was grabbed to lead him through to the bedroom. He was shoved face down on the bed and buried his face in the pillows as Ruby's weight came down on the back of his thighs. Her hands touched on his shoulders to start massaging them, and the strong, kneading touches made him relax. The touch eventually slid all the way down to his back. It was when pleasure turned to a flare of pain. "Fuck," he gasped in a muffled voice, when a hand spanked hard on his ass, then started groping his taut cheeks. "I hope you're going to repay the compliment," Ruby eventually said, and got up to her knees. It allowed Tom to turn over, and she sat down on his groin when he was lying on his back. Her slow, deliberate movements rubbed her pussy against his cock, and he could feel the excitement already returning to his body. That's what I love about you fit, young soldier boys," Ruby teased as the gyrating of her hips pushed her down harder onto his crotch. "You have such a quick recovery time." Tom put his hands on her hips and lifted his head to look down between her thighs. It was too much to resist, and he made her squeal when he used his power to roll her off him onto her back. He was over her on all fours in an instant. Her hand came up to grab his cock as he leaned down to a kiss. He kept their lips pressed together while she fondled him, but eventually wanted more. His cock pulled from her hand when he started kissing lower, and she grabbed at her tits to squeeze them together as she offered them up to him. The sound of her gasp was loud when he licked along her cleavage, then worked his mouth to a thick, stiff nipple. He pulled at it with his lips before taking it deep to suck on it. Ruby's hand came to the back of his neck to hold his head down, but he didn't need any encouragement to ravage her breasts and worked his mouth back and forth across her chest until her back was arched in pleasure. It was her who finally pushed his head lower, and he wasted no time in licking a wet trail down her midriff, then kissing back and forth across her belly. She parted her legs wide to let the kisses move lower still, and the musky scent of pussy surrounded Tom when he buried his head between soft thighs. Ruby's mouth gaped as she pushed her head back against the bed. The touch of a tongue probing at her slick opening made her cry out, and she got a hand to the top of her pussy mound so she could press fingers into soft flesh. It brought her clitoris into view, and she got what she wanted when Tom swept his tongue across it. Her back arched harder as she pushed towards him, and it was her suddenly losing all control as the surge of pleasure whipped through her naked body. She settled her free hand on his head as he kept licking before sliding his tongue lower to plunge it inside her wet cunt. Her squeal of delight was loud, and she got fingertips to her clitoris as Tom's tongue ravaged her. It made her butt lift up as her muscles clenched until there was finally no holding back the release. The stiffness in her body lasted no more than a split second before she crashed down in a shuddering heap to pull her pussy away from her young lover's mouth. She knew what it would get her, and saw that Tom was fully erect again when he scrambled up to get over her. His weight came down to pin her to the bed as he roughly thrust inside. It brought her excitement to a peak as the pulsing spasms of her pussy walls gripped his manhood. She wrapped her arms around his body to dig fingernails into the top cheeks of his ass, and it held him deep while she savored the high of her orgasm. When she loosened her grip, Tom's muscular body began to crash between her thighs as he chased another moment of pleasure for himself. His rigorous onslaught was just what she wanted, and she encouraged him on as he pounded his cock into her cunt with a frenzy until the pressure in his balls was too much again. The wild, uninhibited coming together ended when he threw himself down on her to bury his erection deep in her slick depths, and she dug her nails into his butt cheeks again as he started to convulse. She closed her eyes as the spurts of his fertile seed erupted inside her, and they stayed locked together in a shared moment of joy until he finally slumped down on her. She could feel the heaving of his chest against hers as he recovered, and she cradled his head against her shoulder until it finally lifted. The kiss was filled with passion to take her breath, and they stared at each other when it ended. "You can stay all week, can't you?" Ruby asked. "Oh, yes," Tom replied before leaning down to another kiss. He could feel the throb of his dying erection inside pussy, and knew that his last hurrah before starting military life was going to be something special as a gorgeous MILF took everything she wanted from him. The end.
Dominated by the Kinky Doctor, Lesbian BDSM Medical Sex. Written by Kaylee Sexton. Narrated by Jessica Howard. Sonia hunched over the form to read through the answers she'd written one last time. She didn't come across any blank boxes in the 5 pages, and it finally satisfied her that she'd completed it properly. "Okay, job done," she let out under her breath when she straightened up. Dropping the pen on the table, she outstretched her arms up above her head to get them rid of some of the stiffness before reaching out to pick up the coffee. She almost spit out the mouthful she took. It was stone cold and tasted horrible, but she forced herself to swallow it. Good going, idiot, she berated herself as she got to her feet. She didn't realize she'd left the cup sitting for so long and went to throw the cold contents down the sink. A check of her watch showed it was just after 4 in the afternoon, so there was still some time before she needed to leave. She put the kettle on to make herself a fresh coffee and returned to the table when she'd done so. Putting the cup down, she picked up the form to put it in the envelope she'd been given and lifted it to her mouth to kiss it. Money in the bank, she said. At least that's what she hoped the clinical trial would bring her. When she saw the advert for it in the paper, she'd rang right away, and the questions she asked got her on the forms. Now it was almost time for her to meet the doctor in charge, which was why she'd read through the details she'd filled in again. She didn't want to mess up and ruin the chance of what she thought would be an easy $500 if she was accepted for the trial. She'd been out of work for a few months now and really needed the money, so crossed her fingers and sent up a short prayer of hope before picking up her coffee. Her mind went over her mounting problems as she sat drinking. Not that she wanted to think about them, but they'd been at the forefront of her mind more and more in recent times. Losing her job had been a disaster that came completely out of the blue, and she desperately needed to find a new one. It was proving much more difficult than she anticipated, however. That meant her savings were on the verge of running out. Payment for the clinical trial would give her a chance to sort out the rent and bills, which would give her another month to arrange something more permanent. Here's hoping, she muttered. She sat for a while longer to finish her coffee, but eventually got up to wash the cup, then walked through to her bedroom to get ready. The meeting she was about to have was essentially an interview, so she decided to treat it as such and put on her suit to make a good first impression. She tied her long blonde hair into a ponytail and put on some makeup without going overboard. You scrub up well, she teased herself as she checked her appearance in the mirror. Brought a smile to her face for no more than a second. Looking smart hadn't helped her in any of her recent job interviews, and it was getting her down. She tried to put the negative thoughts out of her mind when she left the bedroom and moved around the apartment to get her keys, wallet, and form to put them in her bag. It completed her preparations, and she checked the time to see that it was now almost 5. The meeting was scheduled for 6, and she knew she'd arrive too early if she got on a bus straight away. She didn't really want to sit in her apartment any longer, though, so got going and decided to walk part of the way to waste some time. It was almost 5:30 when she finally caught a ride. The bus was busy, but there were seats available, and she dropped on one and then stared out the window during the journey. The stop she got off at was a couple of streets away from the examination room, and the walk got her to the place pretty much on time. Reaching out, she tried the door to see if it was unlocked. It wasn't, so she rang the bell and stepped back. She started to fuss with the lapels of her jacket and got more fidgety as the seconds ticked by. Come on, she let out under her breath. She reached out again but pulled her hand back before ringing the bell when she heard the door opening. It made her put a smile on her face, but she couldn't stop the surprise from showing when she got her first sight of Dr. Stewart. Not that she knew the first thing about clinical trials, but she'd expected the doctor leading it to be older. That certainly wasn't the case, however. The woman she found herself staring at looked to be no older than mid-20s, and Sonia's first impression was that she was meeting a cute doctor. "You're Miss Perez?" Dr. Stewart said, and smiled. "Yes," Sonia replied. "I'm here about the trial?" "Then come on in," Dr. Stewart said, and moved aside. Sonia stepped past to walk into the reception area, and a glance around showed it was empty. "You found the place all right?" Dr. Stewart queried, after closing the door. "Yeah, it was no problem." Good, Dr. Stewart went on. "Well, if you'll follow me, I'll take you along to my office and we can have a chat." "Okay," Sonia said. Dr. Stewart got moving to walk out of the reception area to a corridor that had doors on both sides. "Is it just the two of us here?" Sonia asked. "Yes," Dr. Stewart replied without looking back. "We close at 5:30 and the others have gone. I'll be mainly conducting the trial in the evening, so I'll have the place to myself to do that." "How many people will be involved?" "A group of 20, Dr. Stewart said. She stopped at the door and held out a hand to show Sonia should walk into the room first. When she followed, she closed the door and pointed to the desk. "Please take a seat," she said. Sonia led the way across the room. She dropped on the chair, got the envelope from her bag, and waited until Dr. Stewart was sitting before speaking. "I think I filled it in correctly," she said, and slid the envelope across the desk. Dr. Stewart took the form out to start reading, and it sparked a conversation about the trial that lasted around 35 minutes. The final question Sonia was asked set her back on her heels. She hadn't really expected her motives for applying to be questioned, and she was flustered to the point where she couldn't think of what to say. "All I'm looking for is honesty," Dr. Stewart said to break the slightly awkward silence. Sonia tightened her lips together and finally decided to tell the truth. "It's really for the money more than anything," she said. "I lost my job a few months ago and don't have much of my savings left. Finding other work isn't turning out to be so easy. I mean, I'm interested in helping you, but the truth is the payment is the main reason I'm here. Sorry." "No need to be sorry," Dr. Stewart said. "I expect that money is the motive for many of the people involved in a clinical trial, but you're the first one I've met so far that came out and openly admitted it." "It's not going to affect my chances of being picked, is it?" Sonia asked. A smile flashed across Dr. Stewart's face as she leaned back in her chair. "No," she said. "As a matter of fact, it gives you a better chance." Sonia saw a smile flash across Dr. Stewart's face again, and the gaze that fell on her didn't look strictly professional. It dropped down to her chest before coming up again. I'm not sure I understand," she let out. "Are you interested in making a little more money?" Dr. Stewart asked. Sonia's ears pricked up. She was definitely interested in making more money, but was suddenly wary of the turn the conversation was taking. A sense that something wasn't quite right crept over her, and there was no shrugging it off. "What would I have to do for it?" she asked. "We could have your initial examination right now," Dr. Stewart went on. Sonia stared across the desk at the pretty face opposite. She didn't consider herself to be naive, but still wasn't sure she was reading the situation right. The idea that the doctor was coming on to her was a little unsettling, but she didn't want to make a fool of herself by assuming something that turned out to be completely wrong. "What exactly do you want from me?" she asked. "I want you as part of the trial," Dr. Stewart said. "But that doesn't have to be all there is between us." The realization her instincts had been right made the breath catch in Sonia's throat. She was slightly shocked by her own reaction, but the words came out of her mouth before she could stop them. "How much extra would you pay?" "Let's say we would increase the money you get by 25%. Sonia quickly did the math in her head to work out it would get her a total payment of $625. The chance to earn some money was there for the taking, but there was no doubt what she'd have to give, and it would be a lot more than an examination. Saying no didn't even enter her mind, though. "I definitely get signed up for the trial?" she asked. "From everything we discussed, you seem like an ideal candidate for it," Dr. Stewart replied. "Okay then," Sonia said. Dr. Stewart rolled her chair back and got to her feet. "Let's get you ready then," she said. "Follow me." Sonia lifted a hand to wipe the back of her wrist across her mouth. Her lips felt dry, so she slid her tongue around them as she remained sitting. Dr. Stewart came to a stop at a curtained screen and looked back. "Are you interested or not?" she asked and smiled. The comment got Sonia to her feet to move across the room. She walked behind the screen and was surprised when she was followed. "Let's get you undressed," Dr. Stewart said. Sonia tensed, but didn't stop the jacket being taken from her, and watched as it was hung over the back of the chair. There was nothing else on it, and she asked the question that came in her head. "Where's the gown?" "We don't need to worry about a gown," Dr. Stewart said, and reached out again. Sonia glanced down to the buttons of her blouse being undone. The zipper of her skirt was then loosened to make it slide down her legs and pool around her feet. The blouse was taken from her, and suddenly she was standing in only her underwear. Nerves kicked in to make her tremble, but it wasn't all she experienced, and the fact that a kinky medical play game was turning her on a little brought a swell of shame she couldn't shake off. "Think of the money," she let out under her breath. She knew her comment was heard, but nothing was said as her shoulder was seized to make her turn around. Her bra was loosened, and she was the one who dragged the straps from her shoulders. She tensed when her hair was swept to the side, and let out a gasping breath when a kiss pressed on her shoulder. "What are you going to do with me?" she asked. "Examine you," Dr. Stewart answered. She worked her lips to the sensitive skin of Sonia's neck as she slid her hands down to get them to panties. She started to ease the underwear down, then moved back to get a good look. "Take them off," she said, and spanked her hand on ass. The flare of pain made Sonia wince, but she'd gone too far to back out, and took hold of her panties to ease them down. It meant leaning forward, and she shuddered as she was groped. It made her hurry to get her underwear off, and she straightened up. "What about my heels?" she asked. "You can leave them on," Dr. Stewart said, and spanked her hand on ass again. "Now, get to the examination table." Sonia moved immediately to avoid any more of the stinging punishment. She knew the doctor's gaze would be on her as she stepped out from behind the screen and walked across the room. There was something dirty about it that brought out her excitement even more, and the shame was there again. It didn't stop her, though. When she got to the table, her shoulder was grabbed to spin her around, and a kiss knocked her head back. Hands came around her body to pull her close, and it pressed her naked curves against the white coat of Dr. Stewart. She was held in the embrace as their lips crushed together fiercely, and she couldn't pretend it wasn't turning her on. The touch on her lower back slid to her ass, and she pulled out of the kiss as fingers sank roughly into her flesh. "You're taking advantage of me," she gasped. "You can leave whenever you want," Dr. Stewart said. "Do you want to?" Sonia was sure that doing so wouldn't just risk the extra money she'd been promised. It would kill off her chances of being involved in the study, and she wasn't about to risk that. "No," she said, and shook her head. "Then let's get you in position for your examination," Dr. Stewart said. "Sit on the table for me." Sonia turned to look at the gynecology table, and a sense of unease rippled through her. She was about to put herself in the most vulnerable position of her life, and the rush of adrenaline made her heartbeat race. There was no getting out of it, though, so she pressed her palms down on the table to get herself up on it. "Now lie down," Dr. Stewart ordered. Sonia closed her eyes as she did it, but they snapped back open when she was kissed again. Fingers closed around her breast, and she liked the feel of her nipples stiffening against the doctor's palm. She let out a gasping breath when the kiss ended, and her chest puffed out as her breasts were fondled. Dr. Stewart eventually ended the groping and moved around to the bottom of the table. She stepped forward so she could reach out to brush her fingertips on the shoes Sonia still wore. "Nice heels," she said. Sonia reached out to the sides of the table and gripped hold as she lifted her head to watch. Dr. Stewart leaned down to nuzzle her lips against the black leather, and it was clear she had a thing about heels. She finally straightened up so she could lift both feet into place in the stirrups. Sonia flinched as her legs were spread wide apart and slid a hand down to cover herself up. Her breathing grew heavier as she continued to watch, but no effort was made to pull her hand away at first. "We need to get you nice and sensitive first," Dr. Stewart said as she stepped away from the table. "What do you mean?" Sonia asked. That she didn't get a reply unnerved her, and all she could do was watch. She could feel the slickness on her skin as she kept her hand in place. Her breathing grew a little more ragged as her gaze remained on the doctor, and her voice came out nervously when she saw the piece of equipment that brought out the metal cabinet. "What's that?" she asked. There was still no response until the doctor was back between spread thighs. "This," Dr. Stewart said, as she pulled Sonia's hand away to uncover pussy, "is to get you sensitive." Sonia tensed when the light touch of fingertips brushed across her naked vulva, and she squirmed a little. Her lips tightened together to hold in the gasp, but she knew the slipperiness on her skin wouldn't go unnoticed. It revealed her arousal, and she felt a flush of heat on her face. "It works better if you're shaved bare," Dr. Stewart said. "But we'll save that for another time." A shiver trickled down Sonia's spine when a touch grazed slowly along her pussy lips. The comment showed she would likely end up on the table more than once, but there was no time to think about that. "Let's get you strapped in," Dr. Stewart went on when she pulled her hand away. She set the device down on the table, and Sonia lifted her head higher to get a better look. It had the appearance of an oxygen mask, with a short length of tubing attached it to a plastic ball pump. She knew it wasn't about to be placed over her mouth, though, and her grip on the table tightened. Straps were wound around her ankles to tie them down. The stirrups were then adjusted to spread her legs even further apart, and she shuddered when Dr. Stewart leaned in to kiss on her naked skin. Her butt clenched when a lick swept along her pussy lips, and she couldn't hold in the gasping groan as the intimate touch of another woman brought pleasure. "It gets better," Dr. Stewart said when she straightened up. "You planned this," Sonia blurted out. Dr. Stewart let out a hushed laugh. "I was hoping one of my girls would be willing to play along with my fantasies," she said, and picked up the pussy pump. "You and I are going to enjoy our time together." Sonia bristled as she watched, and her breathing became ragged. She wasn't sure what the hell she'd gotten herself into, but it was too late to back out. Her ankles strained against the straps holding them down in the stirrups, and she could feel the flutter of pain as the leather bit into her flesh. Dr. Stewart reached into the pocket of her white coat to bring out a small tube of lubricant gel. She squeezed some onto her fingertips and worked it around the lip of the mask. "Creates a better seal," she said when she saw the pensive gaze locked on what she was doing. Sonia closed her eyes when the cool sensation of the gel touched on her naked skin. She got herself into some kinky medical play and shuddered as the mask was held in place on her pubic mound. "Ready?" Dr. Stewart asked. "No," Sonia replied, and heard the laugh. She wasn't sure what to expect, and braced herself when the ball pump was squeezed. Her hips jerked up when she felt the grip of the seal taking hold. The suction grew stronger as Dr. Stewart worked the device, and Sonia's back arched up. Her grip tightened on the table as the weird sensation turned to pleasure she didn't expect, and her body stretched out. There was no holding in the curse as her flesh became engorged. The pumping made the suction stronger still, and she started to let out gasping cries as she squirmed. The straps bit harder into her ankles as she struggled against them, but there was no stopping what was started. "Enough! Enough!" she let out. It didn't stop Dr. Stewart, though. She leaned down to watch Pussy through the clear plastic of the mask and kept pumping. It made Sonia's pussy lips swell more until her words turned to desperate cries. The sudden easing of the pressure when the release valve was engaged came as a surprise, but not as much as the touch that stroked across her vulva. It was the most sensitive she'd ever felt in her life, and her ass bucked up as the rush of intense pleasure took her breath. "Doesn't that feel good?" Dr. Stewart said. The excitement in the words made Sonia open her eyes. She couldn't stop shaking as fingertips stroked harder across her inflamed pussy. Her skin felt like it was on fire, and each touch sent ripples of burning pleasure through her body. She knew she was about to get more when Dr. Stewart leaned in. Suddenly, a pretty face was only inches from her pussy, and the warmth of breath on her slippery flesh was enough to get her longing for more. She tried to push forward, and it got her the kiss she wanted. Her body stiffened when a lick swept along the full length of her pussy lips, and she let out a cry. "Want more?" Dr. Stewart asked. "Yes," Sonia gasped. She only realized what she'd agreed to when she saw the lip of the mask being lubricated again. "No, I didn't mean—" It was as far as she got before the equipment was clamped in place over her pussy mound once more. She let out a whimpering groan when the suction gripped hold of her flesh. Her teeth sank into her bottom lip as she pressed her head back onto the padded surface of the table, and there was no stopping the slow arching of her body as the pump was worked hard. She opened her mouth wide, but couldn't get out the words she wanted to say. It didn't matter anyways. She'd put herself in the hands of a dirty doctor who was taking full advantage of the opportunity. The pumping made her flesh swell and redden as it engorged with blood, until it felt like her whole body was ablaze. "Please," she gasped, and shudders rippled through her when the release valve was activated. The easing of the pressure gave no relief, and she started to thrash around as forceful kisses pressed between her thighs. It quickly turned to licking, and she could feel herself losing control as she was used. Fingers dug into her flesh to spread her wide open. The growing pressure between her thighs was way more intense than she'd ever experienced, and she tried to push towards the licking that swept across her exposed clitoris. She desperately wanted a release and started to plead for it. Dr. Stewart forced her head forward to press her tongue on clitoris as she stroked her gel-covered fingertips into position at Sonia's slick pussy opening. She made her submissive lover wait to build the anticipation, and heard the loud groan when she fucked her fingers in hard to bury them deep in wet cunt. Shudders ripped through her as she violated a patient on her examination table for the first time, and it was everything she wanted and more. She started to stroke her fingers into engorged pussy as she licked harder on clit, and the taste brought out a raging lust that was insatiable. The way Sonia was being forcibly defiled excited her more than she ever thought it would, and she could barely believe how sensitive she was to the rough touches. Her grip tightened on the edges of the table as the building pleasure climbed to a peak that left her stretched out. The burning ache for the release was almost overwhelming, as the kinky sex took her right to the edge, then crashing over it. Her scream of joy echoed around the room as her hips bucked violently, and the burst of tingling pleasure became all there was. Nothing else mattered in that moment, and she started to writhe around as the rough penetration of stiff fingers made her gush. The squirts of pussy juice made Dr. Stewart gasp, but she fucked her fingers in harder to keep them coming. Sonia's body stretched out rigidly as she was taken all the way to the peak of her passion, before the delicious thrill of such a strong orgasm began to fade. Slowly slumped down to the table as she gasped for breath and closed her eyes tightly as she enjoyed the last pleasure of stiff fingers slowly being eased out. The sensitivity of her still engorged flesh made her gasp when kisses were pressed on it, but the sex finally came to an end,